Episode 6 of The Acolyte Star Wars show on Disney Plus is loaded with lore from the Sith side of the Force. So let's break down some of the things that we saw in this episode and give it a bit of a review. Now, one of the things that Kimir says and refers to is the power of two, and this is one of the biggest pieces of actual Sith lore in itself. And it also shows us that Kimir is basically, he believes he's a Sith and he's doing everything like a Sith. There were a lot of doubts and confusion in previous episodes as to whether or not he actually was one or not, but I'm pretty sure that he is based on the things that he said, and in particular was his reference to the power of two. Now, this is something that goes back to the Skywalker saga itself, all the way from episode 1, and something that carries through right throughout those 9 films. So in episode 1, Qui-Gon Jinn refers to the power of two. He says that if there is an apprentice, there is also a master. There are always two Sith. And similarly with this, Kimir is looking for a pupil. He wants an apprentice. He wants his number 2 to be able to help him to drive forward and conquer whatever it is that he's trying to conquer. He's determined that he wants his acolyte. He wants his number 2. He wants to be able to follow this rule of the Sith in order to create his presumably empire of sorts, or certainly to dominate and defeat whatever enemies it is that he has. So the power of two is definitely something that they're referring to. They use those exact words, and it's definitely something that Kimir is looking to do in this show. So I don't think there's any doubt anymore as to whether or not he was actually a Sith. He's certainly trying to be, if nothing else. In addition to referring to the power of two, he also refers to the way that the Sith are actually being able to harness the Force. It's mentioned throughout the show that the Jedi don't really have this ability to tap into emotions particularly because they're very emotionally detached. Their connection to the Force comes through a lot of hard work and practice and skill and dedication and all of these things, very meditative states of combat and all this kind of stuff. Whereas with the Sith, they don't necessarily need the strict routines of training and all of the things that Jedi do with their pupils, because the Sith are relying on something else to draw upon the Force, something that the Jedi don't use or refuse to use, and that is their emotions. So what Kimir is talking about is the fact that you don't necessarily need to be trained in the ways that the Jedi do it in order to capture the Force. You can rely on your hatred or your fear or your anger or your desire and basically tap into these emotions in order to access the Force and use them. And this is a Sith trait. This is how they do it. They are driven by passion. The exact opposite of the way that the Jedi do it, where they're essentially more like monks. They don't really allow themselves to feel anything. Having said that, throughout this episode and really throughout the entire series to date, Sol is showing a ridiculous amount of detachment and emotion, not only to certain people, but events and things that happen throughout the series, and also something in his backstory which we don't yet know about. Something has happened to Sol before this show, something that may go back to all the way when Osha and May were originally kind of taken by the Jedi, or at least one of them was. Something else has happened that they've not yet shown us, and it certainly seems as though Kimir maybe knows what that is. And there's also suggestions in there that it might be Sol that was the person responsible for Kimir actually turning away from the Jedi into the dark side in the first place. Kimir talks about a scar that he has on his back, quite a deep one. And although he doesn't actually confirm it, it's suggested that it was maybe put there by his former Jedi master, betrayed in a sense and rejected from the Jedi. So is it Sol? Could it actually be him who was responsible for turning Kimir to the dark side? It's difficult to really believe that, simply because the two characters have met previously in the series and they don't seem to recognise one another. So it just doesn't quite seem to fit in terms of the narrative, but something has definitely happened. And whether or not we actually get that backstory, I mean, I imagine that we will. We very nearly get to it by the end of this episode, and I feel that perhaps in the next one we get to at least see where Sol has come from and what trauma it is that he's hiding. And whatever it is, he's hiding it from the Jedi Council as well, because at one stage he says it's time for him to tell them absolutely everything and open up about whatever it is that he's trying to hide. So because of the fact that he's hiding something and feels the necessity to actually tell the Jedi Council about it, we know that whatever it is that he's hiding is probably pretty dark, probably not good, and we don't really know what it's going to be. But throughout the entire episode, he's been overly protective of perhaps Osha and May, but maybe it's not actually about them. Maybe he's not as emotionally attached to them as he pretends to be, because remembering that's not a Jedi trait. Maybe what he's actually worried about is that the two of them and their story will somehow reveal his own fall, essentially, as a Jedi, or something about his backstory that he doesn't want them to know about. Particularly telling was the fact that when Venestra and her sort of party come to try to rescue Sol from the planet that they're on, he scarpers and hides and jettisons off into hyperspace before Venestra has a chance to get there. So why the secrecy? Why is he trying to hide and run away so much from whatever these problems are? But whatever it is, I'm glad that they're doing that, because I think, as I said in a previous vlog, what we don't want is Sol going and telling the council that there is a Sith, because as we've said before, theoretically, they shouldn't find out, because if they do find out, then we know, or they will know, that the Sith aren't actually extinct, or certainly haven't been extinct for a millennia, as is the phrase that's used in episode 1. So at the moment, we're still following on course with that. He hasn't made it back to the Jedi Temple, and perhaps doesn't seem to be making any attempt to get there. So whatever this backstory is, he's about to tell May about it as the episode finishes. So hopefully next week we might find out actually what it is that he's going to say. The other thing that's actually confirmed in this episode is that Kimir's helmet is made of cortosis, and this is particularly interesting because there were a lot of things flying around that I saw online, loads of people saying that there's no metal in Star Wars lore that allows you to deactivate a lightsaber and deflect it after he goes headbutting lightsabers, which by the way was cool, but actually you can. That particular metal cortosis, it does actually allow you to interrupt lightsabers and interfere with them and causing them to malfunction on impact, and they are resistant up to a certain degree of lightsaber strikes. They're not completely indestructible in the way that Beskar is, but they will at least hold up for a little while. And actually that's quite true, because by the end of the previous episode, you saw that his helmet broke, and he's now having to fix it in this one. So they are sticking really nicely to the lore in terms of the sort of weird and wonderful things in Star Wars, that even down to the metalwork that they're using, and how successful or not successful it is. But they are actually sticking to lore, and that comes, I believe, from EU Legends and all these kinds of things. So it's nothing new. So all of the people that were kind of complaining about it kind of let themselves slip up a little bit, because actually they are sticking true to the lore when it comes to that side of things. So I got to give them credit for that, and it did then lead to some really brilliant action sequences in the last episode. I mean, headbutting a lightsaber and getting away with it, that was pretty cool to see. The fight sequences in that were really, really good. So kudos for them for actually sticking to that part of the lore at least, albeit they haven't done with other things, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, but at least with that, they were true to the lore for once. Overall though, kind of a slow episode. Nothing particularly really happens. Kimir has obviously stolen Osha and taken her back off to his little remote island, but the thing that was really interesting was the very last scene of the episode where Osha tries on his helmet, and it's just suggesting that actually there is something happening when she puts it on, that all of a sudden things maybe start clicking in her mind as to actually maybe the Sith are the way forward, and maybe Osha will turn. She lets out the fact that she failed Jedi tests previously, and that was why she left the Jedi initially. So perhaps in failing those tests, maybe it was because she was too emotional. We know obviously she comes from a place of trauma with everything that happened with her upbringing, and thinking that she'd lost her sister. She certainly did lose everybody else, but maybe that's why she failed the tests. Maybe it was because they saw too much of the dark side in her, and now that she's actually put on Kimir's helmet at the end of this episode, it's just suggesting that actually she may be the one to turn out to be Kimir's acolyte. She may actually be the one who ignites the power of two, as it were. Now, we don't know that, but it certainly was very, very suggestive of the fact that as soon as she put that helmet on, something was changing in her. So that will be really interesting to kind of see as to whether or not in the last 2 episodes to go, there is a bit of a switch. And, you know, maybe it will be that May actually starts to sympathise more with the Jedi, and Osha will switch and then start to tap into some sort of Sith Force sensitivity that she perhaps has, or has always had and been afraid of. So it may well be that we see these twin sisters suddenly flip over and we end up with them being on opposite sides from where they start with. Having said that though, with only 2 episodes left, there's not going to be a lot of that story to tell, because realistically, I can't imagine that they're going to do a second season of this. I don't see it happening. I could be wrong. I don't really know if I would want them to or not. But I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be particularly upset if they didn't do another series of this. I'm a little bit indifferent. I'll like it because it's Star Wars. I always enjoy that content. But this particular show, it's suffered in a lot of ways simply because I think the writing's been particularly poor in certain places where they haven't followed the lore particularly well. They've done really well when it comes to really obscure things like metal substances and elements in Star Wars, but then not doing so well when it comes to sort of suggesting that Anakin may not be the chosen one because of the fact that Osha and May were born of the Force. So there's kind of these things that don't work when other times they do other things really, really well. The other thing that's quite interesting in this was seeing Venestra's lightsaber whip, and I dread to think what the hatred for that is like online, but actually it is right for the lore. In the High Republic novels, that is exactly what she uses, and I don't believe that she's the first one to ever have that type of weapon. I think there may be instances back in Legends where that may have been used before, but certainly as far as canon is concerned, in the High Republic novels, she does have that weapon. She always has done. So there's nothing unusual about seeing that when you're familiar with those canon stories. So actually it was kind of cool to see it, albeit very, very briefly and only the once. It was still kind of cool to actually see it being done in live action. So hopefully we'll see a little bit more of that. I'm sure it will upset people, but it's cool. It's a lightsaber whip. I don't really see why we should be complaining about this. It's actually really, really cool. Why does a lightsaber have to have a completely straight blade? It doesn't. So anyway, that's a whole nother issue. But there were some really interesting things. But for me in particular, the thing that stood out, apart from Kim's helmet, which I thought was a brilliant kind of suggestive way to finish the episode where Osha might turn, and also confirming that actually it was made of a substance that was capable of doing what we saw it do in the previous episode, we also got to see this Sith lore coming out. I don't think there's any doubt at all that Kimir is a Sith. The problem is he's got to presumably not survive the show, because if he does, certainly the Jedi can't find out about him, or at least the Council or the Jedi overall, because he's supposed to be extinct. They're not supposed to be there. So he's got to kind of remain in the shadows, very well hidden or even defeated. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen over the next couple of episodes. It's kind of hard to predict, but I do think that Osha might start to turn. Sol is obviously going to reveal this backstory where maybe he's not quite the Jedi that he's been made out to be. And I think some of these characters have got to go by the end of the series. So there we go. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Did you enjoy the episode? Filming this today is actually Tuesday, so the next episode comes out tomorrow. So I'll try and do a review for that over the next couple of days before the weekend, where we get to Goodwood Festival of Speed, where I shall be on the Sunday doing a load of filming, and I'll be putting those videos up, of course, for you all to see. So please do stay tuned for that. It's going to be really cool. And please do subscribe. Please give the video a like. Please leave a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to actually get your opinions on this show, and obviously talk about those in future episodes. So please do that. And with that said, and on that terrible disappointment, it is time to end the show, and I will see you guys real soon.